Hello and welcome. Come in, grab a seat, grab your drink. Let's have a little chitty chat. Today, I want to chitty chat about Dune. Dune is a novel by Frank Herbert that has been adapted into films a couple of times, and it also has been adapted into a TV show, which I have yet to see. But today, I wanted to discuss my thoughts about Dune as a whole. I have watched the new movie, I have watched half an hour of the old movie, and I've read the first book, and I wanted to chat about my opinions. Before we really get into this, I do want to admit one thing about my bias. I'm not a huge space opera type of person. Like, that is not my preferred version of sci-fi. Like, I like city sci-fi. Like, I like big city, futuristic technology type of sci-fi. So I have to be honest, this is not my main cup of tea. And so that does color my opinions for sure. And I want to be honest about that. I want to be upfront about that before we get going. One of my other colors, one of the things that colors my reading experience is my love for themes. And my love for themes is the reason why I even picked up Dune in the first place, because I've heard from many people that I trust, that the themes of Dune are just chef's kiss. So I thought I will give it a go. Now, let's start with the book. I want to start with what I read so that we can talk about the movies with a little bit of reference, a little bit of, context. So, the book. I want to talk about a couple of elements about the book, what I liked, what I didn't like, and let's just go ahead and get into it. First of all, I want to talk about the plot of the book Dune. I think that a lot of people have similar feelings about this. The plot of Dune is not its strength. I will be honest. It's not its strength. Unless you like really slow stories that then all of a sudden just get really fast at the end. Like, I mean, we're talking there's a 2-year time gap and then all of a sudden everything is happening. That's the end of the book. There's some problems with pacing, very slow, then all of a sudden it's a lot, not my favorite way to read a book, but it's okay. That can happen, that can work. Overall, I felt like the plot was not enough to keep me actively reading. I think what kept me actively reading was expecting something with the themes. That's what kept me going, not the plot. It was enough to keep my attention while I was reading it, but as soon as I was done reading it, I wasn't really thinking that much about it because it's a lot of political stuff, which I find very interesting. I love Game of Thrones. I love those kind of stories with a lot of political intrigue, a lot of like backstabbing and fun stuff going on. And I will admit, the politics in Dune are quite interesting. But again, not something that I was like thinking a lot about outside of the reading experience. That's not a bad thing. It's just my opinion, what I went through, my experience. Then I really want to talk about the characters for a second. There are some really good characters, some okay characters, and then, everyone in between. I thoroughly enjoy the Mentats. The Mentats and the Bene Gesserit are just fascinating characters. Every single one that comes on to the page, I am enthralled. I am curious. I want to know more. I really would have liked to know more about the Mentat world. I'm sure that in later books, you probably learn a lot more about the Mentats. I just really enjoyed those elements. I thought that was really cool that like there's a person whose brain is kind of like a computer, and then on the other side of that with the Bene Gesserit, there are women who can literally control other people with just the way that they say things. But I think that we need to talk about the elephant in the room. And that elephant is Paul. Paul is the main character. He's the one that we're supposed to be most invested in. And I have to say, he is very bland. He's that quintessential chosen one. But the problem is he doesn't really have much of a personality. Now, I think that he is an INFJ. And this is nothing against INFJs. Believe me, there are many interesting INFJs out there. Paul, the character, not so interesting. When you're reading a 25-hour audio book's worth of book, I want to be invested in the characters, I want to be invested in all the characters. And anytime Paul was on screen, I was just not invested. I was more invested in what he was learning than who he was. And for me, I'm a character reader, so to not be invested in like the main character, the main one that we're following, is a little bit difficult. But it's okay because I still think that there's a lot of really interesting characters in Dune, and I would actually argue that Dune's characters are much stronger than Foundation characters, at least when we're talking first book to first book comparison. Foundation and Dune is definitely the winner of the character conversation. Some of the characters were absolutely fascinating, some of them, were boring. And then we have to get into the themes. The thing about the themes is I don't know if I really picked up that much about the themes from my first read through. I've watched videos since about the themes, and it seems like the themes are more on an overarching sense about the whole series, and the themes within the actual book aren't so much within the story as they are within the world. And I think that's fascinating. I think that's interesting. That's something I haven't really seen before. But I didn't know that going in. I just knew that there were a lot of themes and that the worms represented stuff. And I don't know, maybe I'm just slow. I just wasn't picking them up. I have watched videos about the themes to try to understand what I missed and why it wasn't clicking with me. I believe is because the story was so slow. To me, it's hard for me to invest when there's not a whole lot going on and not much to cling to. I didn't pick up on the themes while reading it, and that could be because it took me so long to read it. I was reading it very slowly, and I wasn't really getting through the book very quickly. And so my expectation going into the movie was that I'd be able to pick up on that a lot more easily because there'd be a lot less words to get across the ideas. So now, that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the movies. First of all, we have to mention the 1980 version. I don't remember exactly what year, but it's in 1980s. That movie has the best rendition of those energy shields. Definitely how I imagined it. 10 out of 10 Minecraft man all the way. 100% how I imagined it. Totally how I imagine it. Definitely. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. I didn't imagine it like that. I really, really tried to get into the Dune movie, but they changed so many things. Like from the very beginning, like this intro that's telling you about the world and telling you about what's going on is completely different from the book. It just straight off the bat, it's different from the book. And it's hard for me to get into something that's really, really far off. I can normally guess why they made a certain decision and I can go along with it. But with the 80s version movie, I just was not feeling it. So also the way that they did the Mentats was dirty. They did the Mentats so dirty. They made them look disgusting and they gave them long overgrown eyebrows and it was just not a good look. Not a good look. I don't know why they did that to my Mentats. I did end up stopping that movie about half an hour into it. I couldn't get into it. I tried, okay? I gave it the college try. It didn't work for me. I stopped it. I'm not afraid of DNFing things. I have no problem DNFing. But that now brings us to the 2021 version of Dune, which I'm not going to lie, I have been very much so looking forward to this. I watched the trailer and I was like, dang, these visuals, 10 out of 10. I actually watched the trailer again after I finished reading Dune in June. I read 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 Dune in June. Dune in June. That's kind of a tongue twister. I read Dune in June. Anyhow, I watched the commercial afterwards and I was like, wow, this is very faithful. It's way more faithful than the 80s movie. I'm pretty interested to see how they're going to interpret it. And so, a couple days ago, I watched Dune. Dune was visually absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I was not surprised by that. The commercials gave you a very good idea, a very good sense of what you're getting into. But I think that watching it is even better because when you're in these scenes, this movie is incredibly atmospheric. These scenes have giant shots. We're talking if you were watching this in the movie theater, it would look like these massive ships that are so ungodly huge. And I think that's the image they were trying to get across is this massiveness of it all and yet this desolate nature of it all. And I think they did a very effective job of capturing the tone and the vibes. And I also, the music. Oh, the music made me feel feels. The music really got me. I mean, they give you this dark, overbearing music that makes you just feel the desolation of it all, feel the desperation of Duke Leto. It feels like there's a lot of feel. And one would argue that this is a highly atmospheric movie. And that's fine. That is definitely a vibe, and I appreciate atmospheric movies. I do. However, I will not lie. I mean, this is where my bias comes in, my personal experiential bias. I have ADHD. I don't do well with incredibly atmospheric movies. I cannot hold my attention for that. I'll be honest, there were times when my attention was not on the movie. I was trying to give it my full attention. I was 100% attempting to. I gave it my best attempt at full attention. And I sat through all 3 hours of it, or 2 hours and 45 minutes, or whatever, it's long. I could have done without so many of the atmospheric things and a little bit more of the story, because something that they did in order to fit in so many massive, amazing shots was they cut out most of the story. And now, okay, the story was a little boring. I will not lie. Like reading the book, it was a little bit boring because there was so much information that was outside of just the story. There's just so much information that you have to sift through to get to the story. That's why I found it boring. And what the movie ended up doing is they kept that feeling of way too much information, but they took out all the story. It still felt long and boring, and the story was almost non-existent. There was almost none. It was like half cut out. Without getting into spoilers, there's some stuff that goes down, and characters who get revealed as bad guys, there's an emotional sting when you read the book. Like, yeah, the book wasn't the most exciting for me, but I still felt an emotional sting when this one character did something really awful. I felt the sting. Didn't feel a single sting for the movie. I was like, okay, well, now you just sound racist. I didn't feel emotionally invested in that character like I did in the book. And that character was actually one of my favorites. And there were some side characters that really build a lot of relationship with Paul. And yeah, I might not like Paul, but I like the relationships that he built. And we don't really get to see that. It's sort of like we're supposed to accept their relationships. Like specifically with Paul and the guy who gets to know the Fremen, we're just expected to accept their relationship, which I think they do a decent job of portraying a relationship that is long-standing. But still, as a viewer, I want to feel something towards that relationship. That's important to me, that I feel for the relationship. Otherwise, if I'm not emotionally invested, I'm just spending 3 hours looking at pretty stuff. I said this in my Instagram, but if I want to watch ASMR, I'm just going to pop on YouTube and search ASMR, you know? I don't want to pay to watch ASMR. I will say that there's one thing that the adaptation did that I think was fantastic. They did really good with this element of the adaptation, and that was to get the point across of what was happening through a smaller amount of information. So in the beginning, you have a little bit of narration and you're able to get a sense of how massive this world is, and you get to understand the Emperor's motivations a lot more clearly. And I like that because sometimes it's hard for me to understand the hidden intention, and they brought it right up to the surface, and I really, really enjoyed that. I thought that that was a good move for a movie because you only have so much time to fit everything in. It's important to kind of explain what's going on sometimes rather than just letting people figure it out. The Memoirs of a Geisha did a similar thing with the narration. Sometimes they got across the point in fewer words, and sometimes with just like visuals, they would get across the point that several chapters were trying to get across in the book. And I thoroughly enjoyed the way that they did that in Dune. I just wish that they had used more of the screen time for story and less for visuals. Like, is that so crazy? Is that so awful of me to say that I just wanted more story and less visuals? Like, they used 3 hours of a movie to cover half of a book. And half of the movie was just visuals. It was just these big, massive scenes with like the really cool background music. Like, yeah, it was cool. I appreciate the aesthetic of it. It was cool. But there was just too much of it and not enough story. If they had enough story to make me feel for the characters, then yeah, sure, I'd be fine with all the visuals. Like, cut the visuals in half and add the story back in. I needed more of the story, because the story was one of the, like, the actual character interactions. Like I said, character work is the strength of Dune. In the book, I wish that that was brought more into the movie. Another thing that I think they did well was Jessica. I just think that the way that they did the whole Bene Gesserit thing was very cool. And the way that they introduced the space war, it felt like Star Wars, but way better. You know, it's better than Star Wars. I mean, we're talking leaps and bounds better than Star Wars. It doesn't have any of that cheesy humor that I hate. It takes itself seriously. It gives you a serious story, a very political and interesting story. And I think that it's a very faithful adaptation. So if you like Dune, if you like the vibes of Dune, you're probably going to like the movie too. I have ADHD, so I didn't love it that much. There's things I love more, like Lord of the Rings. It's good. It's a good movie. It's an interesting movie. And I think Dune itself is interesting. I think that for its time, it definitely deserves the attention. I don't fully understand why it's so popular. I don't, but it is interesting. I think that there are definitely better science fiction writers from that time, like Philip K. Dick, but that's my opinion. You know, that's just my opinion. And you're allowed your opinion. You might actually love space operas and be like, Michelle, you're crazy. Dune is the greatest series of all time. That's fine. It's not my favorite series. I already told you my bias in the beginning. I don't love a space opera, but I found that this movie was a very good adaptation of the book. The book itself is a little bit boring. The movie itself was a little bit boring. So I feel like it matched, you know, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to be honest. Those are my feelings on Dune. What did you think about Dune the book? What did you think about the movie? What's your favorite adaptation? Tell me your thoughts down below. And while you're at it, I hope that you have a beautiful, amazing, fantastic day. Bye.